All right, so we finished it last week talking about beasts, the beasts of the sea and the beasts of the land, and the beasts being the henchmen and the helpers of the dragon, being Satan, the ancient serpent. So there was this contrast with the last section, the last passage dealing with the forces on earth they're just aiming to conquer the evil forces of Satan and his henchmen, and they're constantly working, constantly pushing, constantly trying to get into find an opening, find a crack, deceive people. Their modus operandi is deception and luring people, multitudes of people, into their crafty little work. And interestingly, Benjamin yesterday, my son, he was reading something and he said, boy, listen to this. And it's really appropriate to today. 2 Corinthians 4:4. 2 Corinthians 4:4, Paul's talking about the unbelievers. And he says, in their case, the unbelievers, in their case, the God of this world, that's lower G, and the God of this world being who?
Satan.
Was that?
Satan.
Satan. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel, the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. I love that passage. He says, blinded their minds, blinded the minds of the unbelievers. Do you ever feel, as a Christian, like you're just on a different planet from other people? Like you see things completely differently. And there's just no common framework to even have a discussion about
life.
So, about how you live life, about how you do
What
anything.
is life?
What is life? Yeah, what's it all about? Why are you here? Even basic things about what you should be doing with yourself as a person. You know that you're not an animal. You may be a mammal, but you're not an animal running the streets like contemporary man wants to do. And it's really interesting when you don't have this frame of reference. You obviously gravitate and cling to other believers, and obviously a strong fellowship of believers is important. Christ calls us to continue to talk to, engage, minister to, evangelize the unbelievers. But boy, there is that chasm there, that chasm of blinders that they just have. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Of course, that's the old Calvinist thing. Either you're going to have the blinders and you're going to be elect. You're not going to be elect, or you are elect and you don't need the evangelism. But that's another discussion for another time. But we're certainly called to evangelize everybody, even if those blinders are there, even if that veil of just almost nowhere to start in the discussion, we're still to do it. So, but that's what Satan does: is the beast of the sea, and the beast of the land, particularly the beast of the sea, the false prophet, is continuously pulling people, the multitudes, into different directions. So, when we talked about the martyrs before, remember in 6 or 7, I think, the martyrs under the altar, what were they saying?
How long?
How long? How long, God? How long till you avenge our blood? And what did God say?
He says, wait until.
A little longer. Just relax a little longer. Take it easy a little longer. It's coming. Well, it's here. So in chapter 14, we start talking about, we've had wrath, but here we have the sort of the, you know, the harvest of the earth begins here. So it's an interesting transition, an interesting juxtaposition of last week, dealing purely and specifically with what's happening on the earth with Satan. Now we move, John's vision changes and turns back toward heaven, and now we're looking at the heavenly host, we're looking at God, we're looking at what's happening in the heavenly realm, and specifically we're looking, you know, at someone standing on Mount Zion. So someone read, if you could, 14, 1 through 5.
Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harp, and they were singing a new song before the throne, and before the 4 living creatures, and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless.
So it's easy to read through these passages sometime and just, you know, the imagery, it doesn't, it's kind of sometimes a little repetitive, you kind of pass through it looking for the meat, but boy, the imagery is just so great. So on Mount Zion, what's Mount Zion?
Heaven.
More specifically, it's the eternal state. It's God's place after the second coming. It's the eternal state of heaven, the new heaven, new earth, new Zion. It's where eternity will be. And who's standing there? With the capital L, meaning Jesus. So just picture that, you know, we're dealing with monsters in the past section, and now we move to the imagery of, again, the Lamb who was slaughtered, who took our sins at the cross, and he's the Lamb. And with him the 144,000 connoting what again?
The church. And
the church.
And the saints and the apostles.
Yeah, the redeemed. So in this, it's this kind of, the church is the 12, the square of the church, or the magnitude of the church, the completeness of the church. So there's 144,000 with them, and unlike the seal that I messed up last week, this is actually the seal that is of the redeemed. The seals, we talked about that in 10 or so, or 9. They have the seal. What's the seal? What's the seal do? I'm sorry, Sandy, you're picking up right in the middle.
I know.
It's not a good place to pick up Revelation in chapter 14.
Which is why I don't preach through Revelation on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, you can't. You can't do it.
I just found out I can go back and pick it up, though, so I'll get my answer back.
Okay.
Because he says it's on YouTube.
Yeah, it's about a chapter a week, so we're probably got 14 weeks.
That's
So,
right.
like
but it's
July.
better, not better. It's not nearly as better, but it's shorter than Ken's 61 weeks.
61 weeks.
This is the Cliff Notes version of
61.
This is the Cliff Notes version of Ken's 61 weeks.
I asked a question that I thought there would be a simple answer, and there wasn't. It was a complicated answer, so that's why I'm sorry.
This is a class, this is a lesson that I think is right for this class with, you know, mature Christians who've been studying it a while.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
It's a challenge. So, in this case, the seal is not like the seal of last week. This is a different seal we talked about. Remember the seal on the forehead? This is the seal of the believers, and this is the seal, sealing your salvation, guaranteeing your salvation. So while they may be martyred, they may suffer, and unlike Joel Osteen's teaching, which is all about goodness and light and everything's great once you become a believer, God doesn't promise that. God promises difficulty, persecution, ultimately death. Death will be the final result of everybody. So Christ just says, with the seal, you're sealed. Salvation is sealed. Doesn't matter what Domitian does, doesn't matter what Rome does, doesn't matter what anyone does. You're sealed. Okay. And then, I love this, and I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters, like the sound of loud thunder. So a voice from heaven, like the roar of many waters. Just think about it. Think of many waters, not a stream. You all been to roaring waters? Ever been to Niagara Falls? Has anyone been to Niagara Falls?
Mm-hmm.
The sound is just deafening, right? I mean, this is not OSHA-approved sound levels. These are very loud stuff. So, the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. Again, also not OSHA-approved, very loud. The voice I heard was like, and this is the same voice, was like harpists playing on their harps. And they were singing a new song. Think about the magnitude of harps playing so loud and so just powerful that it's the sound of Niagara Falls. And there's this new song. A new song, Old Testament often refers to what does it refer to? Victory of the enemy is what the new song often refers to. And so here they're singing this new song, and there are 4 living creatures. And Sandy, we got everything all diagrammed, just so you know. 4 living creatures. That's what this diagram is. This diagram is a running diagram of Revelation.
And I didn't know, and I was here early.
So this is God's throne, 4 living creatures around him, and then 24 elders constantly, continuously proclaiming the name of God. And so no one can learn the song except the 44,000. I just love that. You know, there's, again, that divide between the redeemed and the non-redeemed. They can't learn it. They may try. They may hear something, they may think, but it's only for the redeemed that can learn this song. And it's for these who haven't been defiled themselves with women, for their virgins. The connotation being purity in general. You know, it's not specifically, you know, that singularity of the word, but it's purity. It's for these fellows, for those who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. People who follow Christ, they've been redeemed from mankind as first fruits, and God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they're blameless. So in following Christ's example, well, every man is sinful, and everyone is ultimately breaks these. They are following Christ, and they're trying to follow Christ, and heaven will follow Christ completely. All right, so we're going to do 2 chapters today, by the way. We could, these 2 chapters, Ken did 6 sections, 6 passages. You can dive very deeply theologically into these.
Yep.
I'm doing them in 1. So 6. Someone read 6 to 13. So we got 3 angels that are coming in here. And interestingly, the angels are you typically think of angels as being the ones playing the harps, right? Sitting up in the clouds, thinking nice, saying nice things. And well, we're going to see what these angels do here in a second. So I want to read 6 through 13.
Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and springs of water."
All right, let's stop there. So, here's the first of three angels, flying overhead. Good imagery, flying with the wings, and the eternal gospel. And it's interesting, because this says, what does gospel mean?
Good
The word
news.
gospel.
Good news.
Good news, exactly. This is a different kind of gospel that he's talking about here. And what is he proclaiming?
Judgment.
Yep. Telling everybody in a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. And worship him who made the heaven and the earth, and the sea and the springs. Telling him, it's coming, it's here. Start worshiping. And then the second angel in verse 8, anybody want to read that?
A second angel followed and said, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries."
This is an interesting passage because there is a pretty lengthy discussion on Babylon in Revelation, but it hadn't occurred yet. It's occurring in a couple of chapters, and it's a very interesting one. So it says, Babylon the Great is fallen. So in chapters 16, 17, let's see. Chapter 18 is the fall of Babylon. But here, sort of foreshadowing, predicting,
Right.
you're telling that Babylon is fallen. So, what Babylon? Because in 96 AD, Babylon wasn't the great power that it was. So we'll dive into more in a few weeks, but conceptually, what do you think Babylon is here?
Rome.
What's that?
Rome.
Devil.
What's that?
The devil.
Yeah, probably all together. I think it's the, and we look at Babylon. Babylon represented paganism, debauchery, bondage, slavery, sort of the forces of the world, evil forces of the world. Babylon manifest in what in 96 AD? What were all those kind of conditions? What's that?
I'm groaning.
Oh.
Groaning if Rome was the Babylon of the first century. Babylon in the 21st century. That's where I'm groaning.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think Babylon in the 21st
I don't
century
want to
is?
say it.
The United States.
All right, he said it.
So you look at it, and so at the time, Rome was the manifestation of Babylon, and while in AD 96 it was, specifically referring to a place, a people, a leader, perhaps. The connotations are much broader than that.
It's any earthly authority that thinks it's great.
Right.
Mm.
And that works on the behest of Satan,
Yeah.
right? That's not following after God's own
Yeah.
heart. There are great
So
countries.
there's multiple nations
Yeah,
that would apply here.
yeah. So Babylon clearly wasn't talking about Babylon at this time. He was specifically talking about the spirit of Babylon. Sort of like the spirit of Egypt and Gomorrah, or Egypt and Sodom a couple of weeks ago, when he kind of brought those two together of bondage and slavery, debauchery and paganism, all kind of coming together. Same thing with Babylon. So, one of the things I wonder, he never calls out. He uses all this imagery, this codes, to talk about Rome and talk about the evil. Ken, what do you think about the idea that he was doing this so that his his word could be spread without
I think
the
it's
fear
code,
of.
it's code language so that it could get to them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. You think so? Okay.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the other thing is just like Ken said, it makes it more universal too, because whoever's teaching it can put that word on what,
Yeah.
at 2000, now, like Ken said, there is a place now, so.
Yep. That's true. All right, so let's look at what the third, anyway, let's read about the third angel.
A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on the forehead or on the hand, he too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. He will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. There is no rest day or night for those who worship the beast and his image, or for anyone who receives the mark on his head, of his name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of saints who obey God's commandments and remain faithful to Jesus."
All right, so, and this mark is different. This mark is what we talked about at the end last week. And Carol mentioned what happens to the person who receives this mark. This is the mark on the forehead and the hand of the people who are following Satan and following his people. And the question is, can you come back from that? Is there a second chance that happens when you get that mark? I mean, when you get that mark, you got to be pretty serious about who you're following, I think. It's a. And then what happens? He will drink what?
Cup of his wrath.
Wine of God's wrath. Full strength wine, not just a little, light content, but full strength with his anger. When you think about God and his wrath through the years, look at the Old Testament. Would you want to be subjected to God's wrath? Man, God's a God of love, but he's also a God of wrath, and he's exercised his wrath pretty remarkably over the millennia. And in 11, how long does this last? Forever and ever. They have no rest. So I heard a loud voice in 13. I heard a loud voice say, "Write this: Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them." So, all right, let's look at the harvest of the earth. This is an interesting imagery, and I really found it interesting in that when I first read it, I've read it, a number of times, but thinking about it and looking at it more critically this time, I had a different reading that I think is what's really meant. So look at, somebody read 14, read the whole thing, 14 through the end.
Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud, one like the Son of Man, with a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe." So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, and the angel who has authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the great harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as the horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia.
All right, so the first time I read this, I didn't read all the way through 19, and I thought, okay, so the the harvest. Sounds pretty good. What's happening? My first thought was, oh, he's harvesting his people. He's bringing his people, because there's a section in Matthew 13:37. Christ is first described as a gospel sower. He's planting the seeds, right? And he's going to, for ultimately reaping the harvest of believers. But as you read through to 19, this ain't that, for sure. But again, great imagery, white cloud, seated on the cloud, one like the Son of Man, golden crown on his head, sharp sickle. So they've got the sickle. So what's the sickle? What's the sickle and the harvest meaning? Who's being harvested?
Unbelievers.
Unbelievers.
And it's a chaff.
There you go. Elaborate.
Well, it's separate the wheat from the chaff. The wheat is the believers, the chaff is the unbelievers.
And what does he do in your chaff example? What happens to them?
Throws them into the fire to be burned.
No,
Well, I'm not reading this.
Yeah,
I'm
19
going
says,
back.
yeah, threw them into the great winepress of the wrath of God.
Oh.
So these are wine. This is wine, a wine analogy rather than a wheat. But the wheat, the wheat from the chaff is an illustration that's used multiple times. For Scripture, same thing. But here it's the wine. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and the blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle, so like 5 feet or so. And I meant to look it up. You know what a stadia is?
184 miles. 1600 stadia is 184 miles.
I'm sorry, what 1600 is what?
184 miles. A stadium
The
was
stadium-
about 607 feet or 185 meters.
Okay, so how
Good
many?
footnote. Good footnote.
So how many miles? That's
184 miles.
184. So is that Lake Charles?
No.
Jackson?
I was going to say almost to Alexandria.
Almost Alexandria.
It's a long ride.
That's a lot of blood.
Pretty vivid.
Pretty vivid, without a doubt. All right, so then we go from that to remember the sevens we had. What are the sevens again? We had seven seals, and the seventh seal begat what? Begat 7 trumpets, right? And we've been through the 7 trumpets, and there was, what did we do? What were 2 subsets of the trumpets? There were 3 woes, remember that? So we've gotten the 7 trumpets, and the 5th trumpet and the interlude were the first 2 woes. 1 more woe is yet to come, because there are 3 woes. And I think the 3rd woe comes in the bowls of wrath. So God's about to pour out bowls of wrath. There was also another 7 that we almost got to look at, but God said, don't look at it. Don't write it down. You remember that? It was the 7 thunders. And the 7 thunders had the secret. The secret of everything, the secret of life, the secret of God's purpose. I don't know, but whatever it was something that God kept to himself and didn't want to reveal to us, because he told John not to write it down. John knows, but John may be the only human that knows that. I don't know, but he didn't write it down. So we're going to do just the introduction real quick of the 7 plagues, or the 7 bowls of wrath. And I'll read that in chapter 15. Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and amazing, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last. For with them the wrath of God is finished. And I saw what appeared to be a sea of glass mingled with fire, and also those who had conquered the beast and its image and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass with harps of God in their hands. And they sang the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, great and amazing are your deeds, O Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of nations, who will fear not, O Lord, and glorify your name. For you are alone and holy. All nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. After this I looked, and the sanctuary of the tent of witnesses in heaven was open. And out of the sanctuary came the 7 angels with the 7 plagues, clothed in pure bright linen, with golden sashes around their chests. And of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the sanctuary was filled with smoke and the glory of God, and from his power, and no one could enter the sanctuary until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were finished. What an imagery, right? Got the bowl is just pouring out wrath on mankind. This is the final wrath. We do move after this, after we go into the wraths, and the wraths in this case are only 1 chapter. Then we start moving into victory and conquest and the new heaven and the new earth. We've been having a lot of wrath over the past number of months, and this is the last major one. So, what do you know of the Song of Moses? When he says they were singing the Song of Moses.
I don't know, but it occurs to me that are these wraths, 7 wraths, parallel to the wraths that were at Exodus, for the Jews? Boy, I can't talk.
The 10 plagues, you mean?
Yeah. Oh, I thought there were 7 plagues.
Yeah,
there were 10 plagues.
There were 10 plagues.
Okay.
10 plagues in
I
Exodus.
just watched that movie too.
Yeah, there were 10. They're not parallel, but
Well, I just noticed the first one was bowls, and I know that one was in there. So.
yeah. We will be talking about that next week. So come next week, and we'll look in detail of that. But it is interesting. It does come back to Moses. And what's the Song of Moses? Do you remember that? Song of Moses is in Exodus 15, and it's after after they pass the Red Sea, and it's a song of praise to God and vanquishing the enemies, focusing on God, moving forward, God's work, God's unique power, and so it wasn't just a kind of a one-off that Moses did back in the desert. This is eternity. This is in Revelation. This is in heaven. They're still singing the Song of Moses. So while you read, so often you read something in the Old Testament, and it's happened 2,500 years before Christ, it's not really relevant anymore. It's relevant. It's still relevant. It's being sung in heaven to represent God's work for all time. So, don't have a lot of time to dive into. It's fairly straightforward. Both of these chapters are fairly straightforward, but great imagery and setting up the 7 bowls for next week, I think, is just an interesting passage. Any thoughts? We'll finish on time today and do 2 chapters. Normally we struggle to get through 1 chapter because there's some pretty heavy stuff.
What was Ken's assignment to read? What one did he want us to read? Did you go to the service? Anybody go to the service?
Yeah, I did the late service. I'm in the later service, so I don't know what he's done.
Assignment. I don't know, I missed it.
All right. Okay. Thanks. All right. Any